Hi, everybody. So, for those of you that don't know HAE, we are a global nonprofit organization with over 15,000 members dedicated to supporting experienced and aspiring entrepreneurs. Our new workshop series is purposed to guide startups through some of their most difficult challenges that all of them face, whether it's fundraising, marketing, tax incentives, or today's focus, perfecting a pitch. Sorry. Allison Byers is today's guest. And a fun fact about Allison is that her daughter is the only first grader whose favorite band is Weezer. So with that said, I will pass the stage over to Allison to tell you a little bit more about herself and the benefits of refining your pitch.
All right, thanks for inviting me to do this today. This is going to be a fun session, and I do like to make things interactive. So as we get going after a little intro, when we go through the pitch basics and presentation basics, I'm going to open call for questions. And if you have a question at any time during this presentation, feel free to raise your virtual hand, and I'll call you up and see if we can answer it. But a little background on me, I'm Allison. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Scroobious, which I founded in January of 2020, right before the pandemic hit. So that was a super fun time to start a company. And I've got my MBA. I've got over 15 years experience building and leading startups. That's all I've really ever done is startups. I just love them. And I focus on data-driven startups. And I really like to utilize data to understand human behavior and influence what we can do there. So prior to running Scroobious, I co-ran a startup medical device company. And while there, I was the one primarily responsible for fundraising. And we did raise nearly 10 million. And that was my firsthand experience in the whole fundraising game, everything from friends and family to grants. We got up to a Series A prime, bridges, you name it. We did that source of funding, and the inspiration for what I'm doing now at Scroobious came from that experience. But in terms of pitching and presentations, this is something that I've been doing my whole career before, since I did undergrad. I've been doing presentations and pitches, and I really love taking complicated information and putting it into a simple and compelling narrative. So that lends itself really well to running pitch workshops. On the personal side, I'm married. I've got 2 kids in elementary school. I am super vocal about women entrepreneurship, in particular mothers. I think we are the best multitaskers and really excel at startups. Really quick note on what we do at Scroobious. This is not a sales pitch, but this is my whole world right now, is helping founders and helping them with their pitches in particular. We have a whole platform geared toward making it less scary and more approachable to create your pitch, to tell it confidently. And in our program, you also get to make a pitch video that you can send out for more effective fundraising. And whether you work with us or not, highly encourage pitch videos for a whole slew of reasons. Happy to follow up with anyone afterward about that. The way we're going to run the workshop today is we have a framework for the core building blocks of what goes in an investor-ready pitch deck. I do focus toward fundraising pitch decks, but these core sections are relevant to any type of pitch that you're going to give. They lend themselves to explaining the basics of your business mechanics, the storytelling element, and I've got lots of founders who are with nonprofits, who are looking for sponsorships, even entrepreneur and sales pitches. This really lends itself to that format. There are a number of frameworks out there to choose from. I'm not saying you have to use this one. Building a pitch is not a one-size-fits-all, but the most important thing of any framework you choose is you have to do the work behind it. The pitch today is what used to be the business plan. People really don't make business plans anymore. And if you don't have the meat behind each of these sections of your deck, it's going to come through, and it's going to be damaging when you get into Q&A or diligence if you can't go deeper than superficial level slides. So no matter how pretty it looks, it isn't going to help you if you haven't put the work in behind it to get it there. And so I really want to get that across. Putting your pitch together is not like a one-day thing. It really takes some effort because it's what goes into it, what's behind it. So today we're going to go through each of these 10 sections at a pretty high level, kind of the Cliff Notes version that we can fit in an hour. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the presentation side of things as well once we get through the 10. Another quick note, you will have different versions of your pitch for different purposes. So today we're really going to focus on a high level 5-minute pitch. Again, that core, the building blocks, but you're going to want to have other slides as well for different contexts. The 5-minute pitch is really used for entering into competitions or events, for sending ahead, for cold or warm outreach. The goal of it is to get a first meeting. You're also going to have a longer version. You're going to have a 10-minute pitch where you have a first meeting. You're doing a live pitch. It's not sending ahead. That's really the goal, is to get a second meeting. And then you're going to have the more in-depth version. So what I recommend is putting together your core so you have that, and then keep all the slides you make, just put them in backup, put them in your appendix. You can always pull them in or out depending on the context of your pitch. And when you get into Q&A, which hopefully you do, it looks awesome to be able to pull up a slide that addresses the question that was just asked. You look really prepared and it's helpful to you too. Okay, last little note before we move on here, how to handle feedback, because founders run into this all the time, and I get asked this all the time. There is no right way to pitch. Nobody is an authority. There is no one structure that everyone uses, and that's part of what makes putting your pitch together so incredibly frustrating. And when you're out there pitching, you're going to get different feedback from different people because everyone is flavored by their own experiences and their own outlook on what should be in a pitch. If you take every piece of feedback you get and run and change your deck, you're going to drive yourself crazy, because 100% you will get conflicting feedback, like absolutely conflicting feedback from different investors. And you have to have the ability to take in the feedback, pay attention to it, think of what you're hearing multiple times, decide what you want to incorporate, what feels right, what feels authentic to you, what supports the narrative that you're looking to tell, because it's your pitch. It's not the investor's pitch. You're going to pitch to so many investors and they're all going to have totally different views on it. So you have to be able to hold true to yourself, and it's your job to decide what feedback makes sense and what feedback maybe doesn't. Okay, so I'm going to start off by talking about just some basic principles of slide design and what you actually put on the slide in terms of making it readable and approachable. As we're going through, or maybe at the end of this section, I'm going to call for questions. I really don't like hearing myself talk for an hour straight. I don't know if there's a question there, maybe just an unmic, but I will call for questions, and if nobody asks a question, I will call on people at random because that's my style and it's more fun that way. So if you think of anything, please don't be shy to raise your hand. So the number one thing, speak in simple terms and write in simple terms. All the examples in my deck here are real examples from founder presentations. So if you look at the one with the X over it, a comprehensive platform for customer engagement that will revolutionize social media for a unique group. What does that company do? Like nobody knows. No one knows what that company does. But the founder thought, engagement, revolutionize, unique. These are words you're supposed to use when you're pitching because they get people excited, but you don't know what is happening. That company was creating what they called the best way for writers to share their social media posts. No one would get that from the other one. But when you say it simply, it just makes sense. It's easy to understand. That's what investors are looking for. They're looking for you to just explain as easily and quickly as possible what it is that you do. And using simple, basic language that is direct and to the point is always the best way to go. This is a huge one. So we're all getting back to in-person meetings, which is great. Virtual meetings are not going to go away. there is a big difference between how we perceive and intake information, whether we're in a room physically with somebody or we're remote looking at a screen. And we're all going to have to really get used to what these differences are and know how to use them to our benefit. So when we are in a room with somebody, we feel compelled to meet their gaze, we feel their presence. Our instinct is to listen to the person with us first talking, and then read the material that they're presenting. So we listen first, read second. When you're remote, we don't feel that pressure to meet somebody's gaze, and we are instinctually reading first. We're looking at our screen, and then we are listening. And this is really important because humans are not able to both listen to words, to language, and read words simultaneously. Our brains can't do it. Like, think of the last time you were reading a book and someone was trying to talk to you and you were so super annoyed because you couldn't understand either one. Your brain can't do it. So whatever you have on your slides when you're presenting remotely, that person is reading them before they are listening to you. And you don't really want that. You want them to pay attention to what you're saying, which is why it's so important to design your slides so that it's glanceable. As much as it can be, you can just take the information in quickly so that they can get to listening to what you're saying. Okay, you'll hear a theme throughout this pitching workshop about simplicity. This is following that same principle. Don't use words you don't have to use. You want the fewest words you can on a slide. So utilize bullets. You can use fragmented sentences in a presentation. It is not the same as writing out what you're doing in a paper. And the fewer you can use, the better. This one seems simple, but I see it all the time, particularly when you're presenting remotely. Just make sure you're using high contrast colors. If you have text on top of a background color, make sure there's a big contrast between the two so that it's easy to read. Okay, this is another big one. I talk about this all the time. Don't label your slides. Don't put problem, solution, market size. It is a waste of space. Use statements, use header statements. They can change how your deck is interpreted in such a great way. Investors don't have a lot of time. They want to immediately understand what you're telling them. So every slide that you're designing, think of the one biggest statement. I call it the so what statement. If someone remembered one thing from this slide, what do you want it to be? Say it in your header. It can be a couple lines long, right? You are then controlling your narrative and you're walking somebody through the story in the way that you want them to interpret it. Because if you leave it up to the investor, they're not going to put the time in to infer what you want them to infer from your slide. So just make it easy. Just tell them. And you can think about it like if you were writing a paragraph, your header is the first sentence, right? So if I went slide by slide and pulled out all your headers, they should kind of follow each other. I should be able to kind of get the gist of your presentation just from your headers. And it really is so powerful. And so this is an example of that, where if you look at kind of the before, it was a label, right? Our solution. You look at the after with the header statement, and it says, our solution is an offline acquisition platform where consumers pay for services with their engagement. I would not have gotten that without that header statement. It just makes it so much easier to understand what you're looking at when you're looking at the slide. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next section. Any questions on kind of just basic layout and design, how you think about what you put on your slide? Kelly, you raised your hand in real life. What's up?
I teach in law school, so when I'm on Zoom, I raise my hand. I wave to my students, and anyway, I use hand signals more than the artificial ones. But the second slide that we're looking at now, I find that headline or that two lines difficult to read. Maybe if it was full size, but it just seems even so a lot of words, and even including solution. Would you try to even make that shorter then? Meaning for me to see our solution is could be even shorter.
Yeah.
I just find the top difficult to read.
Yeah, he didn't have to have our solution is at the front of it. You could chop some words down there. But in general, if you're presenting this on the full screen and if he's the one presenting it, he's basically going to say what the header is at the start of every slide, right? You're basically going to be saying the same thing that's written there to reinforce the point.
Well, I just want to say what you just said about each of these should form the argument is exactly how lawyers are taught. Not that they do it, but it's how lawyers are taught. So you are spot on. That is how we should be communicating. So I wanted to give you 2 thumbs up for that.
Awesome. I'm glad I have a
myself now.
lawyer's stamp of approval. Thank you. Any other questions on this section? Nope. All right, I'm going to move on then. So when you're starting your presentation, you want to start with your mission. You want to start with just what is it that you're doing at a simple, high, easy to understand level. And again, you want to make it easy to understand. A lot of founders come to me and they have these vision statements that are like lofty and full of language that they think that investors want to hear them saying, that they're visionaries. It doesn't really mean anything. What is this vision statement mean? I don't know what this company does. So if you look at the after, they will fit your grooming and self-care needs into your weekday, giving you back your personal time. That tells me, okay, they're doing haircuts and grooming services during the week, and the higher level goal is giving someone back their weekends to have their personal time be their personal time. I get what they do and I get the mission behind it. Didn't come through in that first one at all. Rice, am I saying Reese? Am I saying it right?
You got it right the second time, but thank you. No one gets it right, don't worry. So, except for lawyers. So I'm on my 8th startup. I haven't co-founded all of them, but a couple of them we did, and we've had some success, which was good. But the thing that I found is, and that I keep hearing, is that often in the beginning, one of the best ways to get into your vision mission is to talk about somehow, if you can tie it to something personal that got you to this moment, right? Like my current startup, there's a reason why we built it. It just wasn't like, oh, I think there's a problem, here's a solution. It was something happened, right? That then led to, oh, there we go. Never mind, I'm gonna shut up.
Origin story?
I'm shutting up, never mind.
No, you're spot on. Your origin story is so important. And you're right, it is an area that a lot of founders leave out. They think that they shouldn't bring their personal, their origin and why they're doing this into it, that they think it should be formal and not include that. Absolutely, it should include that, right? And there's different kinds of origin stories that you alluded to already. There's a personal connection. There's a firsthand experience with a problem and you couldn't find a solution, so you created a solution. You have technical expertise that gave you insight into how to do something that other people wouldn't have, or you're mission-driven, passion-driven, whatever it is. The reason it's so important is that an investor knows building your startup is going to be harder than you think it's going to be. And they need to know that when it gets that hard, you're not going to walk away, that you are somehow tied to it beyond just what you might gain financially, that you're going to stick with this. And it's just so important. I mean, I tell founders, put in personal pictures if they're relevant. Make it passionate and make it personal. Investors are humans also. They want to feel that you are tied to what you're doing. And I'm going to go backwards one slide here and then we'll move on to the next section. But this tip, I'm going to tell you, it is one of the best things you can do. Yes, this is my grandma, and yes, that is my son. Tell what you are doing to someone who is not involved at all, who doesn't understand your world, who doesn't understand your space, and ask them to repeat back to you what it is that you do. You will gain so much information because they're going to tell it back to you in a simpler way than how you said it. And if they can't tell you what you do, or if it's way off the mark, You know you're saying it too complicated. You got to get it down a level, right? Investors are generalists. They often don't have a particular domain expertise. They will bring those experts in at later conversations if they don't have it themselves, but they're generalists. So you have to speak in a way that anybody could understand what you're doing. And an investor is also evaluating how well you can talk about what you do to see if you're going to be able to sell, if you're going to be able to sell customers, if you're going to be able to sell team members to come join you. You have to be able to explain it. And I mean, I work with biotech and deep tech. There is nothing out there that can't be broken down to a level that a generalist can understand it. So honestly, it seems silly. Sometimes I will bring my 10-year-old in here and ask him to look at a slide and tell me what he thinks that company does. It's so telling. So highly recommend that. Any questions on the mission statement or mission section?
Allison, quick question.
Yeah.
For this, if you have multiple points, multiple bullet points that are in connection here, like personal connection, technical expertise, mission driven, do you list them all, or would you recommend just selecting maybe one or a handful that are more appropriate?
Well, you want to pick whatever was core to the decision to start a company, right? Starting a company is a really big deal. And you want it to be deep enough and tied to something. You might be super passionate and have particular technical expertise, right? And that's fine. Work those into your story. But this is where you're opening your presentation and you're drawing that investor in to understand your world and why you took the leap to do this, because it is a huge deal. Start a company, and they need to know that why you did it. Right? Having a reason that doesn't run a little deeper than I just thought this might work. It's going to be real hard to fundraise off that.
Got it. Thanks so much.
All right, moving on. And I'm trying to keep track of time, but Corey, if you think I'm getting into trouble, let me know. So once you get over just kind of what are you doing at a high level? Why did you start it? You want to get right into the problem. And you want to make the problem as defined and concrete as you possibly can. You need to convince the investor that some group of people or some group of companies or whoever it is feeling a pain point in a quantified or specific way, or there is a known opportunity that, again, you can quantify. So bringing in statistics, bringing in numbers really makes a difference. The first example here is a kid snack product. And she used to have a slide that was, a big statement of the healthy option isn't actually healthy, but it seems anecdotal. Once you put the numbers, right? So I use this example because it doesn't have to be dollars. This is nutritional information. It becomes more real and it becomes more clear what the problem actually is. Another good thing to do is to use graphics, right? So some of the examples here are clearly from my own decks, but just having the text of the funding gap for women and minorities is not as impactful as actually putting in pictures of the money and what that means. It just draws attention. So whatever your pain points are, the problem you've identified, do research, figure out a way to make it tangible and convince someone that there is a problem or there is a strong opportunity. You also want to use short, impactful statements. So again, here, right, it's making it clear. So in this before, you can see there's this generic graphic, there's a quote, it's labeled with problem, right? There's something about how big the industry is. Not totally sure, it doesn't come through to me right away what the problem that is being addressed is. So we changed it and we have a short statement, right? Life is online and older adults are left behind. 75% of users 65 plus do not feel confident on their devices. I've pulled in a statistic that is easy to understand. I immediately get the problem, right? Everybody can see the problem with that. Makes it more clear. So just be very declarative and concrete and also specific because you're about to talk about how you solve this problem. So you have to define it in a way that is solvable, right? I can't say the problem is the funding gap, right? You get more slides than just one in each of these sections, by the way. I have more slides, but no one company is going to solve the funding gap. It's too big. So where do you play? Define your problem in a space where you can solve the problem. Any questions on the problem section? Nope. All right. Normally I'd pick on someone, but I'm going to move on. So now we get into the solution, right? You define your problem. How do you solve it? Talk about how you directly solve the problem that you just defined. If you have a disconnect there, then you've lost the investor, because you're talking about a problem and you're not actually solving that problem. You have to make sure it's directly related to each other. Keep it simple. Again, big one, don't use acronyms. Just don't. They mean, every acronym means something different in every industry. Think about MD. Do you mean a doctor or do you mean a managing director? Because you're presenting to an investor and their first association is managing director, not general public first association. CRO. My world in med device, that was a contract research organization. Everyone knew that. Not so if you're in tech, totally different. So if you are going to use an acronym, define it the first time you use it, call it out, and then you can use it going forward. But don't assume that the person you're pitching to is in your same space. You have to educate them. The other thing, again, I don't care how technical you are, don't throw a chart like this up there. It doesn't mean anything. People are just going to glaze over it. No one wants to hear deduplication. Talk about what it is that you do. What does that mean in a just general sense so I can understand it? The other thing that is great to put in your solution section that way too many founders don't do is include actual screenshots or pictures of what it is that you are delivering. One of the best ways to describe a solution is to walk through a user journey of somebody using it. It just makes it, again, tangible, clear, easy to understand. How does your user interact with what you are doing? It's so much better than big text or marketing speak. Just show me what it is. Even if it's mock-ups, show me what it is. If it's a physical product, take a picture of it. Explain to me how somebody's going to interact with it. Any questions on solution? No? Going once?
I've got one.
All right, Luke, go for it.
Don't you think that could backfire if you're just talking about, this sounds like a concise, clear argument, and you're talking about this customer journey, and even if it's just like a scribble or a loose idea, why would you want to give them anything less than the best you can possibly prepare?
I'm not sure you mean by less than the best you could. You want to show them realistically what it is that you're producing, whether it's software or a good.
Right, but at the end here, I mean, we're talking about a very clear and concise, professionally, like, we're not talking about like scribbles here. Like at the end here, you talked about like a very loose diagram of what your idea is and the customer journey. That just doesn't seem to jive with everything you've said so far.
I mean the customer journey in terms of like what I'm showing here on the screen. So an example from this first one, this is a company called Flora here. There were no screenshots at first. These are mock-ups, right? It doesn't exist right now. But it was impossible to understand what he was talking about with his app and how it actually solved the problem without seeing it and talking through a user case, right? A user journey in terms of if someone signs up and they're looking to diagnose something or they're looking to understand what symptoms they have and what that might lead to, and they can do that here on our screening tools, and then they go here, right? You walk through how a user interacts with your product. So not a loose, like not like a mind map or something, right? But
that's what I heard at the end there. Kind of freaked me out.
Oh, sorry about that. No, you want to, everything in your pitch should be as concrete and tangible as possible. You don't want ambiguity. You don't want anything to be vague, right? You really want to show exactly what it is that you're doing and make it easy for the investor to understand. If you let them guess, they're not going to. I hope that helps.
I have a question.
Yes, Salma.
Hi. So I'm trying to kind of visualize doing a pitch and trying to explain the product in all of 5 minutes together with everything else. It just feels, I would think, overwhelming. I mean, even looking at these slides and just trying to think about the time it would take to go through, describing the journey. I mean, I don't know how you would do that, right?
Yeah, it takes work to make things simple. There's no shortcuts to putting together a pitch. There's no shortcut to explaining to somebody or deciding how to graphically show somebody what you do and what this is, right? So I don't want to make it, there's no false pretenses here. This is work. But your goal, if you're fundraising, is you're asking somebody to give you money to do something. And they need to believe that you're going to be the right steward of their capital and that they have the ability to get a financial return at the end of the day, right? So if you don't put in the work to help get that person there, if it's not compelling in a concise manner, I mean, this is why pitch coaches exist, right? And consultants. This is not easy stuff. And so I can tell you part of my mission behind Scroobious is I work with underserved founders, and I'm trying to make a different model so that it doesn't cost $3,000 to have somebody help you do this, right? That it can be affordable, because there is a lot of education that is required to know how to do something like this. So maybe an unsatisfactory answer, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. There's tools out there that can be very helpful. And there's actually a lot of investors, particularly at micro funds, that are putting out great education in this space as well, because they realize that this is a barrier for a lot of people who aren't used to putting together presentations like this.
Thank you.
Particularly in life sciences. I get a lot of life sciences and biotech that are used to grand rounds and academic presentations, which are entirely different than something like this. Okay, I'm going to move on now to business model. So we've talked about the product, we've talked about the solution. You have to be able to say how you're going to make money on it. It doesn't matter how mission driven you are, unless you're asking for a sponsorship for an event or something where there's no expectation of return at the end in financial terms. You have to make it clear that you know how you're going to get paid and who's going to pay you, that you know who your customer is. Because your customer who pays you could be a very different person than who's using what you're selling, than your end user. So just a couple screenshots again. I've put my own up here to show, I am a startup and I have my go-to-market monetization figured out, but there's a whole lot of monetization I think I can do that I have not figured out. And that might be the case for a lot of you guys too. You can still show that you've thought about it and that you understand your different customer segments, right? Or it could be simple, like the one on the left where you have consumer and you have enterprise pricing. A lot of people have B2B and B2C pricing. Show it, put numbers. You can indicate if it's preliminary pricing, you're not sure yet, you're figuring it out, but you have to show that you know that you're going to charge and you have some reasonable assumptions and you've done some work to understand why you put your price points where they are and that you're going to figure it out. Financials can be tricky. I get asked a lot about including financial projections. I'm going to hit on financial projections a little bit at the end of this presentation as well. But if we're focused on that first, the high level pitch where the goal is to get a meeting, right? You're sending this ahead, or you're entering it into an accelerator or whatever use you have of it. Only 35% of them include financials, according to DocSend. And for women, they are highly scrutinized if you do. And for everyone, they're looked at more, but particularly if you're an underrepresented founder, you tend to get hung up on it. It also can contain sensitive information, and no one is signing an NDA when you're sending your first deck. So don't put anything in there that you wouldn't want maybe one of your competitors seeing, because you just don't know where it's going to end up. I personally advise not including your projections in your first deck, in that 5-minute deck. If you are post-revenue and you have significant numbers to go on and they are very positive and you want to show them, go ahead, because your projections are more meaningful. If you're pre-revenue or early revenue, it's all based on your assumptions anyway. Save it for your second conversation. Okay, I'm going to move on a little bit because we got a lot of we're at 3 o'clock. We've got a lot of ground to cover. So market size is another area that can be very challenging and seem very difficult to get your head around for a lot of people. But in addition to how you're going to make money, you have to show that you could make enough of it, that the math works, that an investor could get the return that they're looking for. That's why market size is so important. So there are two different approaches to doing a market size. I often see top down, highly recommend bottom up. So top down is where you take secondary research and you say something like, the apparel industry is X billions of dollars, and if we get 1% of it, then it's this X billions of dollars. It's not specific to what you do. That kind of information can be really good contextually to show, trends in an industry, but there's a whole lot of spend in there that is not relevant to what you are selling. So it's actually not very specific to your market opportunity, to use specifically for your company. Bottom up takes how many potential customers you have for what you are selling specifically, times the average revenue per customer to you to equal your market size, right? That's a bottom up. It's specific to your business and the actual opportunity for someone in your space. It's much more credible, and I highly recommend doing it. It also comes with terminology. I'm going to guess most people have heard of TAM, SAM, and SOM, and there's a lot of confusion over what those things actually mean. So TAM, you can think about like if you had 100% market share of all your potential customers, that's your TAM. That is your total addressable market. And again, it's your customers. So there's guide rails, there's parameters around it. Who would buy what you're selling, right? If you make women's clothes, 100% of women is not your total customers, right? There's some sub-segment in there that is relevant to what you're doing. So you have to have that in there in your TAM. And then SAM and SOM, you're basically cutting it down. So you're saying, okay, of your TAM, of the total addressable market, what percent do I think I could reach? What percent are serviceable? So it's a lower number, right? And then your SOM is your obtainable market. And you can think of this as your short-term view. In the next 1 to 2 years, what percent do I think I could convert realistically? So what's your short-term 1 to 2 year target? You can do it that percentage knockdown way, or you can have other justifications, like I'm only including these certain regions in the next 1 to 2 years, and that's why that's my SOM. As long as you define what went into the math behind the numbers, then you're fine. It always is dollar value though. This is your market size.
Hi, sorry, say there. Just a quick question, if you don't mind. So is it the SOM or the SAM? So I apologize, it sounds similar. Which is the 1 to 2 year attainable that you're going after? Obtainable.
That's your SOM. That's going to be the smallest dollar value because it's your 1 to 2 year. So you're saying even in the short term, here's the opportunity that we're going after before we grow bigger.
Got it. And SAM would be something like 3 to 5 years, or?
It could be 3 to 5 years, but more it's of your TAM is going to be some big number, right? Like sure. Every potential customer of what you're selling. Your SAM is, well, who's serviceable? Who can I really reach? Because not everyone in that TAM is going to be realistically addressable or serviceable.
Okay, thank you.
Is that okay?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Great. And sometimes if you're selling a tech product, you might say, well, anyone with an internet connection is serviceable, right? But well, still not everyone has an internet connection. There are still people that you're not going to reach. There's always some, even if it's a small percentage, that you're going to knock down. So this table is a framework that I like, and I have an Excel workbook in our program that makes this very approachable to think about how do you do a bottom up. So you're going to have a column with your segments of customers. You can have as many customer segments as you want, as long as they're mutually exclusive, so you're not double counting. So in this, fictitious example, I just split it by large, medium, and small companies, right? If you're B2B SaaS. But you can have B2B and B2C models in here, whoever your customer segments are, list them out. Then you're going to do some secondary research to figure out how many of them exist, right? How many buyers are in each of those segments. Could be a company, could be a person. Then you're going to take an average annual revenue from one of those customers in each segment, just average, right? Doesn't have to be to the penny. Then you're going to multiply them for each segment. That's your TAM. So even if you're not going to do this in your investor pitch, although I highly recommend you do, it's really useful to do it for yourself. It lets you see, do you have segments that way outweigh a different one? Do you have price points that make sense? What if you tinker with them? How does that impact your market size, both the segment and when you add them up? It's really good window into your business opportunity, and it can inform your market strategy, right? How you're going to go to market based on the different size of these segments, the number of customers in each of them. And then you just cut it down again. Here I've got by the percentages. So this is a good model for figuring out your market size. Shaju, did I say it right? No, do you have a question?
Yes, I do have a question. When we address or take the data for this SAM, the TAM, SAM, and SOM, what is the time point that you want to take the data for? As on date, or when your product is ready and ready to be hitting the market?
Well, you can size your market whenever, right? So you want to get, the most credible and recent data you can for how many customers exist. And I've got some sources for that here. There's lots of good places to go try and estimate. As long as it's a credible source, it's good. And then your pricing information, use, if you have a product out there, use the pricing you're using, or use pricing that you think you're going to use when you hit some scale, but you want to make it realistic, right? You want to paint a realistic picture and show an investor that you've done the thought process, you have your assumptions behind your market size.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's less about when you're launching, because you can do a market size activity when you just have an idea, right? When you're just ideating your company, you can still do this exercise. But for doing that secondary research, some good places that people often don't go are industry incumbents. They put out investor presentations and they have to do it publicly most of the time. And they pay for great market research. Use it, download their reports, use what they already paid for. It's a great place to go, and it's credible. All right, I'm going to keep moving on.
Could I ask a question on the last slide? Actually, the table you had, the one before that. So I've got a range of prices that it could be, and I keep debating, do I tell them the lowest one and then have them go, oh my goodness, this isn't really that exciting, or do I give them an average one? Or do I give them a low one to just so that I'm showing that I'm being conservative? What's your thought on in the range, what you should be choosing?
I would always go average. You don't want to go worst case. You don't want to go best case. A lot of people will go best case. So you're often up against people who are telling their best case, but I would head toward realism, right? Do your average. Everyone knows there's going to be a spread in there. So just say on average, this is what it is.
Well, but also the average could be optimistic. I mean, it's just a range, even the average of the range could be optimistic.
I mean, that's, particular to your business. So it's hard to give advice without knowing what you do. But if you can segment the customers, if some customers will tend to be on the lower end of that range and some will be higher, segment them out and then have an average in smaller bands.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, I'm going to move on to competition, and I'm going to kind of, we got I think we have 15 minutes left. Is that right, Corey? I'm going to try and speed round through some of this. But how you fit into the landscape, this is another method that I really like. Investors, I can tell you, are sick of the 2x2 matrix where you are up and to the right. It is fairly meaningless because it completely depends on what you put on your axes, and there is no way that you are always so far beyond your competition. Everyone's up and to the right. This makes it much more specific. So you're going to put yourself in a column and you're going to pick 3 to 5 things in your competitive set. If someone was choosing what to do, what is in that competitive set? And it might not be a company, it might be a status quo way of doing things, right? How are people doing it now? And then in your rows, you're going to list the benefits or the value adds to your customers. So you define what is it that you are providing, and then how do you provide it, and how does your competitive set provide it? And it gives a really clear picture into how you view the landscape. Okay, moving on. Why now? This is super important too. It's not included in every framework. I can tell you investors want to know because a lot of a company also depends on timing. So why now could be macro factors, what's going on in the world and the economy and society. It could be micro factors. It could be your own traction or a new team member that's joined that's going to skyrocket something. But why is now temporarily the right time for your company? Why is it going to succeed? And as it pertains to COVID, make sure you can talk about how you're accelerated by COVID, but you're not defined by it. Because we're already seeing a lot of things are going back to, normal a little bit faster than people thought they would. So this example here is a woman who created a way to do remote eye exams at the height of COVID, right? Super needed, super timely, but it will sustain. People will want that service even after COVID is over. So make sure you frame it in a way that you're not defined by a certain period of time. And you can use market feedback and quotes. I'm going to skim through this one, but again, use it, just talk about why now. And so now I'm going to talk about go-to-market, and I apologize for rushing here at the end. There's so much more in here that I was trying to get to. But when you talk about customer go-to-market, you're talking about your customer acquisition strategy. Sometimes people define go-to-market differently. You really want to talk about how you know who and where your customers are and how you're going to reach those customers. How are they going to know you exist? So again, a framework that I like to use is kind of now, next, later. Now, as you're going to market, who are your early adopters? Who are your champions? And what are the low cost ways, quick, cheap, and easy that you're reaching them? Because if you're at the beginning stage, you're going to market, likely you don't have a lot of capital that you're working with. So how are you doing that? And then next, once you have done your proof of concept, you've reached your early adopters, you've got champions out there, how do you scale it? How do you go beyond those early adopters to people who don't know about you and aren't as likely to purchase? And when you talk about your channels or your strategies, don't just say social media ads, like don't make it generic, right? If you have B2B accounts or you're doing key account planning, are you building an internal sales force? Are you going to contract it out? If you're building an internal sales force, I hope you have a high lifetime value per customer because that's a high CAC, right? So make sure that it aligns with your strategy. If you are in a method where you need to do, you do need to do social media advertising, where? What channels are you, what social media? Are there specific groups? What can you show comparables and how successful they are? Make sure that you are specific. Right? And then later is when you're in your growth stage. What does that look like? You're not going to know all of this right now, but the investor is looking to see that you've thought about it and you have some realistic assumptions. All right, we're going to keep going to team. What's most important with team is showing your founder market fit. Show that you understand the market that you are serving and that you have the operational or technical knowledge on your team to be able to execute. So again, I'm showing you mine. Here, the blurry is just so my investors aren't right up on the slide, but show, if you've got a small team, I have a small team. We have great founder market fit, and I know where my knowledge gaps are. So I've supplemented my knowledge gaps with the advisors around me. So that's how you can use your team slide. If you have contractors, whatever it is, if they're not full-time employees, it's fine. You're showing that you understand what operational and what expertise you need to get the job done and that you've managed to get those people around you. Okay, thank you slide. My one big note here is just put whatever you want on your thank you slide. This is going to like linger around, right? While you're finishing your conversation. It doesn't have to be just your ask. There's a number of things you could ask for. So put whatever you want on that slide. Make sure you include all your social handles. Any way anybody can find information out about you. Reese, I see you've got a question there.
Something I've heard a lot is don't end on a thank you slide. I mean, it's okay to have a thank you slide, but because then afterwards you tend to have a conversation. There's nothing interesting about a thank you slide in your background while you're having a conversation. Have something interesting that sits there behind you. So when you're talking, they're seeing it, and whether it's subliminal or whatever, it's something more interesting. Just thank you and a bunch of email addresses and phone numbers.
Yeah, you can do that too. You always do want to have however someone can find information out about you on the internet in case somebody's sitting there in front of a computer and they're going to start looking you up. You do want to have those social handles or your website or your email. If you're sending ahead, whether it's a PDF or a pitch video, it's good to have the ask and what people can do on the end. And by ask, I mean things like I just showed, like go to my website, sign up for this newsletter, or sign up for this beta, or whatever you want someone to do. Because if they're sending it around, you don't know where it's going, and you'd like for people to be able to know what to do with those things, right? You want them to get in touch with you. So again, that's a little bit contextual. Is this a live pitch or is it asynchronous? And I just want to hit on things that I did not include in this core 10 sections. And one are your financial projections, which I talked about a little bit, the ask itself, your fundraising ask, and then your exit strategy. So the financial projections we did talk about, I would include them if you get into second, third conversations, and that you'll probably be asked for them. If you're pre-revenue, don't make yourself crazy with a complicated financial model. You don't need to do that, but you do need to show that you understand the financial levers of your business and how your assumptions play into what those projections are. So do a 3-year, but base it on your assumptions and formulas that go around those rather than something that's super complex. And just make sure it's believable, right? Like everyone knows how to make a hockey stick, sure, and maybe you have one, but make it a believable one. Don't make it crazy. And then have the ability in your model to like kind of test, right? Test best case, worst case. It's good for you to have too. For your fundraising ask, general solicitation regulations are real things. I'm very sensitive about this. I've done my own huge legal review here. Don't include it if it is not to a known accredited investor or fund. If you're posting it somewhere public or if it's on a platform, make sure you understand if that platform verifies accreditation. If it doesn't, don't put your ask in there. You can still send your pitch. You can still send the core of what you're doing, get a conversation with someone, then include your ask. And when you do, you want to include how much money you're looking to raise, how much you've already filled, the terms, just include it on the slide what the terms are, and how you're going to use the funds, and then the milestones that you will achieve with those funds. Why are you asking for it? Where does it get you to next? And then exit strategy also depends on where your pitch is, who it's to, the context. Is it important? It might not be important to who you're pitching to. Is it important to your industry, right? Maybe your exit strategy influences how you're choosing to go to market, right? That you're going to build strategic partnerships because you hope a strategic will acquire you someday. Maybe include it then, right? Or if you're in an industry like pharma, where they look to acquire companies, then maybe you want to include it, but it's not a requirement. Okay, so we are at 3:24. I did have stuff here about presentation as well. Unfortunately, I did a terrible job at time management, or I just tried to put way too much in here. So I think I'm gonna leave that off for now, and I'm gonna use this extra, the 6 minutes to ask for other questions. And I can see Britta has got her hand raised here already.
Hi there. First of all, thank you. And I think you've done a great job, and you are very knowledgeable. So I want to express my gratitude there. First question is, how long for a pitch video? And then what are the absolute essentials?
So for a pitch video, I recommend a cap of 5 minutes. That's the human attention span for just watching somebody asynchronously talk on your screen. And the essentials are basically what I covered here, these 10 sections. If you're doing a 1-minute pitch or a 3-minute pitch, obviously you can't get to all of this stuff, and you really want to focus on the what you do, the mission, the problem, the solution, right? And who your customers are. You got to kind of hit just the real high notes in something that's shorter, but you'd be surprised at what you can fit in 5 minutes. All right, Tika.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. Great presentation. Is there one thing you can tell us about the performative side of presenting?
One thing. Oh my gosh, I have so many things. Okay, the one thing that I'll tell you is to practice out loud. There is no substitute. You will feel silly doing it. It is the ultimate best way to get comfortable with what you're saying and to have it stick, to have it in your memory so you're not always searching for words. Out loud. Saying it in your head is not the same. As soon as you talk out loud, you're going to realize what words you're stumbling over, what is not natural language for you. You're going to realize when you start wandering off your topic. And if you say it out loud in front of other people, you can also see when they start zoning out, when you're going on a little too long. But saying it out loud, if you have a big presentation coming up, I do this myself. I say it out loud over and over and over again before I have a big presentation. It makes me feel comfortable and confident before I'm going to say it. If you need to, like, put pictures of your family out around you and say it to them so you can pretend there's some other folks in the room and you're not talking to a wall, but it is my #1 piece of advice.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Corey, I have not been looking at the chat at all. Is there anything in there that you think we should get to?
Let me just check. I was kind of dealing with a couple of private questions.
Oh, okay.
But it looks like all the questions were mainly just hand raises. So we are wrapping up our time. I think we have about time for one more.
Can I ask one quick one?
No, John, you can't.
Okay. All right. So post-launch, what's more important to show, that you're growing revenues, you're growing customers?
Well, it really depends on your business model and what your KPIs are. So if you are building a two-sided marketplace, you need to show that you have a good volume of customers on both sides of that. That's probably more important than the revenue piece. But you know, in other business models, revenue is your more important KPI. It really depends how you're tracking your progress and what those key performance indicators are. So again, unsatisfactory answer, but there's not a one size fits all there. It really depends on the company.
Well, I mean, I could, you know, I could show 2 customers that each spend $50,000 a year, or 100 customers that each spend $1,000 a year.
Yeah, but are you B2C or B2B? And is your strategy to go to market?
B2B, but for companies that are B2C.
Yeah, so that's fine. So B2B2C, but if your customer is the B, is the business, and your strategy is to get big tickets, right? Your elephant hunting is your sales strategy, then you should show more of that, right? Then you should show more big tickets. And sometimes you can prove fit or traction with only a handful if they're really big average revenues to the customer, to the company. The reverse of that is then you'd also want to show that you have a customer acquisition cost that is in line with the ticket value of each customer, right? So that's another way to show that you are figuring out your business mechanics in a scalable way.
Okay, better answer.
Okay, well, maybe I know this is the last one of these for this year. Maybe there can be another one on the presentation side of things, and I apologize that I couldn't get to more of that. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful presentation, and I will be sure to send over the slides and Allison's contact information for all of you guys registered for today's event. If you are not already, be sure to join the HAE community, and you can gain access to many other workshops and events and office hours like this. And you will also gain access to our perk offerings, including companies like Scroobious and many more. These offerings include free and discounted services, consultation hours, and more. So I hope that you guys will consider joining HAE, and thank you for attending.
Well, thank you for having me. Thanks everybody for attending. Thanks for all the kind words in the chat. I'll also take you go to the news section of our website. I do a lot of interviews about this kind of structure, and you might find some good content on there too if you're looking to learn more about any of these sections.